What's up, everybody? I'm CJ Tully, and the Mets offseason subtractions plus additions are not adding up with the slow start to the season. Let's talk about it. Now, I've talked about the Mets here and there in a few different videos, but I wanted to do a full deep dive into what the Mets have been thus far this season. They're off to a 15-25 start, and this is their worst start through 40 games since 1993. Now, this Mets team, like I said, had a few big subtractions, including Pete Alonso, Brandon Nimmo in a trade, and Edwin Diaz going over to the Dodgers. Now, these are three guys who are big powerhouses for this team out of the bullpen or in that lineup if you're looking at a Pete Alonso. And Brandon Nimmo was a real cornerstone to this team. He'd been there. He was kind of the personality of the team for a while. So now you look at what this team has been doing of late. Like I said, 15-25 so far this season. And this past weekend, they lose 2 of 3 to the Diamondbacks. And it wasn't just that they lost. They only scored 3 runs within regulation and only had 9 hits within regulation as well. This team was just not getting it together. They're now sitting 12.5 games back in the division. And when you look at the biggest players on this team right now, despite the injuries, you look at Juan Soto and Bo Bichette, they went a combined 0 for 20 within this Diamondback series, and they're making a combined $103 million. Those are the players that need to step up when the team is not performing well, and they just have not gotten it going yet. And in this Diamondback series, it was just a glaring issue. Now, we can also look at some of the additions they've made this offseason. I mentioned Bo Bichette. He signs a 3-year, $126 million contract, and he's hitting just .222 with 2 home runs and 16 RBIs. That was supposed to be a big steal from the Phillies. I'm glad as a Phillies fan we did not sign him, because the production just has not yet been there from Bo Bichette. You can also look at Jorge Polanco. They bring him in on a 2-year, $40 million contract, and he was hitting just 179 before going on the IL, just 14 games into the season. You can also look at Luis Robert Jr. He played in just 24 games before going on IL, and he had a little pop early, but the Luis Robert Jr. they were seeing on the White Sox is pretty much the one you're getting here with the Mets. There were reasons why they could not move him on from the White Sox for so long. The injuries are very prevalent, and here it is with the Mets early into the season. And most shockingly, you can look at Francisco Lindor. He was hitting just .226 with 2 home runs in 24 games played before he got injured. They're hoping to see him back in early to mid-June, but these are the guys that, looking at this lineup, they were supposed to be powerhouses. This was supposed to be one of the best lineups in baseball. I even admitted in the offseason that this lineup had potential to be the best lineup in baseball. But when you put it all together, the team is just not performing like you would have expected. They're not even really playing together as a team whatsoever. Now, I did break down some of the pitching as well, because that really hasn't been the problem. When I looked at this at the beginning of when I was preparing for this video, I thought the pitching maybe was the issue, but you look at Clay Holmes, 4-3 at 1.86 ERA. Not bad whatsoever. Nolan McLean, 1-2 with a 2.78 ERA, and here's maybe your worst addition, I would say. And Freddie Peralta, 2-3 with a 3.12 ERA. Like I said, there were a lot of additions in that lineup, but Freddie Peralta coming over was supposed to be a major move as your number 1 day 1 starter, and he really hasn't played all that well. Now, again, the record isn't going to show all that great when the lineup isn't performing, but this is a team last year that went 83-79. They finished second in the NL East. They did not make the playoffs. The Reds bounced them out of the wild card spot, but this is a Mets team that was only supposed to be going up. You look at Juan Soto coming in a few years ago, and then you add all of these pieces to go along with him. Yes, you lost some big pieces like Pete Alonso and Brandon Nimmo in that lineup, but when you bring in Marcus Semien, Jorge Polanco, you bring in Luis Robert Jr., these are guys that were supposed to bolster the lineup you already had. They spent the money needed. This Mets team just cannot get it going. They're metting very early into the season. Now, I guess there's a chance they could turn this whole thing around, but 12.5 games back in the division in early May, that's a really deep hole to dig yourselves out of. You can look at the Phillies as an example. They've been on a major winning streak, and they are still about 4 games out of the number 1 spot in the NL East. And like I said, they've been winning games. They were, I believe, 8-2 in their last 10 games, and they're still so far behind. It's going to be a very deep hole for the Mets to try and dig themselves out of. I don't know if you guys as Met fans are seeing anything different than I am. Obviously, I don't watch every single Mets game, but when you look at the paper and you look at some of these games that I have watched, the Mets just don't look like they know how to play baseball right now. Now, you did look at the Phillies and the Red Sox. They signed they fired their managers and brought in some new voices. The Mets have not yet made that change. Is that something we're going to see in the future? Are they going to ride this out with Mendoza? I'm not too sure what the issue and what the solution is going to be for this Mets team. You have some very big contracts. I've seen some Mets fans in some of my comments saying that they're ready to sell off some of these big-name players, some of these bigger contracts, start to rebuild, get some prospects in here. So maybe you see a Luis Robert Jr., you start to see a Polanco, maybe you see a Bo Bichette get moved at the deadline. Something that's also very interesting is with these contracts is that we're probably not getting baseball next year. So you sign these guys to these contracts. Maybe you do try and ditch them off now before next year comes around, and you're not going to have baseball or contracts to be paying for. So that could be another interesting part of this. But with the money the Mets have spent Are they doomed? Is there a chance they can get into a wild card? Doesn't seem like they have a chance at the division. Let me know what you guys think. You can always follow me on social media at TikTok and Instagram at Let's Talk Sports. And please feel free to subscribe here. I appreciate everybody who's been viewing the videos. Feel free to comment. Let me know your thoughts. And you can always check me out on my website at letstalksports.com. I'll catch you guys next time. What are the Mets going to do?